Hi, I wanted to tell you about a few things. One is, I've never had a video suppressed before. Not quite sure if it's happened this time, but because of a title that we poorly chose called Don't Have Purines Be the Death of You, I think that Google, YouTube suppressed it, given the fact that we had 3 shootings over the last weekend. They were not promoting anything with a title that had death in it. So there's that thing. So I'm having to redo some of what I've already done. And I figured I'd bring it out and get some work done at the same time. We're doing a lot of transplanting, getting our garden going for the season here in Eastern Carolina. Just had a little rain. Temperature's going to be in the hundreds this week. It's at mid-May. But what I wanted to tell you is that there are at least 5 issues around uric acid you really need to know. And I want to take you through them one at a time so you make this actionable information. And I think this is a great way of doing it. Here we go to tell you about what's important. These are tarragon, by the way, and they're really precious to us because they're hard to get, for one, and you can't start them by seed. We'll get to that later. But what I want you to know is that we're going to use gout as a symptom of what's happened over the last 60 years. Did you know that uric acid levels in the United States for people have doubled from 1960 to 1990? Doubled. They're all level pretty much for the last 200 years, because that's where uric acid showed up. We can even probably assume for 2,500 years. And then from 1990 to about 2017, globally, they doubled again. So they've kind of quadrupled. All this happened in a compressed period of time. And so there's been a lot of papers and attention to what the heck is going on. Well, and we want to sort of reduce it down to, hey, it's fructose. Well, it's not fructose really by itself. It's clearly one of the top things, but basically back in the 60s and early 70s, the research is already there saying fructose will increase your uric acid. So that wasn't new. And actually, that was before all of the increase. That was before high fructose corn syrup came on the market. That was before the whole omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, the linolenic acid, really came into processed food. So we knew that then. That's not a new thing. It did increase in our diets for sure. I think it's important to know where globally is the worst outcomes of, or the highest uric acid readings. And they are primarily in all of Oceania, but it's represented by 2 areas. One is the native population of New Zealand, the Maori, which are basically Pacific Islanders. And the other are the native Taiwanese. They are far higher than the United States. So for all the doubling in the United States, they're far higher. Why is that? It's because they haven't been introduced to the world of not only processed foods, but of sugar coming into their diet. They also have the highest rates. I don't mean Maori and the Taiwanese, but the Pacific Islanders, and there's a number of others, Samoans, Tahitians, and so on. They have outrageously high rates of diabetes. Funny you mentioned that. So speaking of diabetes, the relationship of uric acid to diabetes is pretty interesting. For the range of diet for uric acid is, for males in the United States, which is where we are, is 2 to 6. Those are milligrams per deciliter, just 2 to 6, okay? Ideally, you kind of want it 2 to 4, but for every milligram of uric acid reading as a lab, it goes up, your risk of diabetes goes up 20%. So that's a pretty tight correlation. Uric acid goes up, your risk of diabetes goes up. If it goes up 5 points, which is huge, it means there's a 100% chance you're gonna get diabetes, of course. So why is that important? Because it's one of those things that allows you to take action before something happens. Don't you wish everything had these little sort of things over there you could measure, you could focus on, and you could change, because it's going to change a huge outcome. So the idea that obesity and diabetes are epidemic in the United States, if not the world, that's no secret. This is one of the ways to tackle it. So by looking at uric acid, measuring it on a regular basis, just like we did with glucose and insulin and the omega-6 3 panel we talked about before, and even triglycerides and HDL. All those are really valuable tests, and yet it's so cheap to get that done. Uric acid, we're adding to that collection because it is very helpful to get that done. Okay, so we know that in the last 60 years, uric acid levels have maybe quadrupled in some parts of the world, certainly more than doubled in the United States. Why is that? They focused on fructose, which we knew actually back in the 60s is that was a factor. Okay, congratulations. But how do you account for things like gout 2,700 years ago, 2,500 years ago under Hippocrates? The factor still, and that's about uric acid. We didn't know that until the late 1700s. So how did that come about? What factors did they have? They had a thing called purines, which is everything has purines. This has purines, animal food has purines, much more concentrated. So it's the concentration of the breakdown products of RNA and DNA, which are everywhere. You eat a tomato, you're going to get purines. However, you get a lot more purines in things like mackerel and sardines, small fish, anchovies in particular, and organ meats such as liver, kidney, brains, etc. But liver is far higher than anything else. So if it's beef liver, pork liver, calf's liver is really high, duck and goose, etc. So it's an issue. It doesn't mean don't have those foods. It means, I said they were concentrated, you have them less frequently because they are hugely nutritious. Okay, so they had that. What else did they have 2,500 years ago? They probably had mead. They didn't have much in the way of alcohol, but the affluent that had the, as Hippocrates would say, the unwalkable disease, they probably had more than their share of purines, and it was probably fish for sure, and it was probably more than a bunch of alcohol, more alcohol than they ever cared to have. Okay, but coming forward in time, that's not the whole story. Coming forward in time, we have alcohol, we have purines, fructose. What about supplements? Since the 60s, people taking supplements has gone crazy. Seriously, crazy. First it was the multiple vitamins in the 60s and 70s. That declined. Now people are taking individual supplements, and that's all studied and well documented. Vitamin A is the one that's the big concern. It is in liver, it's in supplements, it's in shampoo, it's in face cream. It's like, check, that's on the list. And so what's the fifth thing that we have or don't have now that they didn't have 2,700 years ago? Well, actually, it's one of those few things that's been taken away that predisposes us to high uric acid. So whether that leads to dementia or Alzheimer's or to gout, we have it, they didn't have it. What is that? We have very little omega-3. We've stopped eating fish. We have the meat we have doesn't have that much vitamin omega-3. So it's actually unique by itself that the amount of omega-3 has fallen drastically. That's your omega-3 index if you're looking for labs, which we've talked about before in previous podcasts and previous videos. But so when you add in lack of or very low omega-3 and now very high omega-6, which does come from processed foods, that's a catastrophe. So when you add all that up, it makes perfect sense. So now let's go to Taiwan and the natives there. What are they having? Same situation. Their omega-3 has dropped and they're on the island. Pacific Islanders, pick your Tahiti or Samoa, wherever you want to go, the situation is the same. That they've dropped the omega-3, they've increased the omega-6, too much fructose. The alcohol, I don't know about their culture, if that was there or not. And the purines were always there, but they weren't balanced with other things. The times have changed. My point is to sort of say there's some actionable information here by following your uric acid. And it is really easy to do. And you know you're going to get your reward for doing it because you'll be able to step out of the way of oncoming diabetes or obesity, which everybody else has been getting. Or change that if that's what you have. I figured I'd tell you something about what we're doing. Built these nice raised bed gardens. We got a couple of them now. And this is in part for our tomatoes, which we plan to obviously harvest, dehydrate, and use that for things like barbecue sauce and ketchup. We also have, this is a reviving German English chamomile, so it grows on the ground. That's your German chamomile, and then there's a catnip down there, and there's more things coming in. We have a ton of basil and cilantro coming in, and the tarragon, the reason I mentioned that was so special, you can't grow it from seeds. It has to start from a slip. And let's assume that's true, and I don't know it is, but I know we failed a number of times with tarragon that's given to us. If that's true, it means everything came from the same plant. Huh, okay then. But anyway, tarragon's wonderful. And we have a small orchard of elderberries starting to come on. But what I wanted to mention, a company actually reached out and said, watching our uric acid videos, and they have a meter for uric acid, but it's not just uric acid, that's already out there. There's a number of companies that do it. It's uric acid with glucose, with ketones, and with cholesterol. So when you put in, I like 3 of the 4, but all 4 are fine. When you put it in that context, you really have a better way of understanding uric acid. So as we get that and as we use that, I'll tell you all about it. That's a big deal. As much as I hate to disturb him, the guy who's working out in the garden, he's getting some important things done. I do think it's important just to recap why this is so important, why this whole focus on uric acid and all these contributing factors, because they directly affect your health, and there are 5 factors that you can do for yourself. These are not esoteric. These are nobody. You really don't need to go see a doctor to help you with all these little steps. This is about taking some responsibility. Yeah, I would encourage getting some labs. UA. What's that going to cost you? 10 bucks? Let's say it's 20, which I doubt it's at. And you can get it, the link is on the video where you can get it at Ulta Labs, but there's plenty of places you can get this. So anyway, I think it's important for you to know this. Take this in your hands, take it seriously, and you would tremendously change the trajectory your health is on, either improving it or preventing it from getting worse. Believe me. All right, let's get to it. 5 factors that increase uric acid: purines, omega-6-3 ratio, alcohol, vitamin A, fructose. We've talked about all of these. This is just a recap. If you really want to go into depth, see the previous video that I did on that. Change these factors, and your risk for dementia, Alzheimer's, obesity, diabetes, gout, and you can throw in arthritis in general, will dramatically decrease. So for most of us that are keto or carnivore or ketovore, we think about organ meats. Are they something I should have? You know, the whole idea of eating head to tail, which nearly nobody does, and then some people just eat all of liver, thinking they're going to overdo that part. But they do think about organ meats. Where is that on the range of things? Is it superfood or is it poison? So beef liver, and you could say calf's liver, is identically the same, except for the fact that it has a lot more vitamin A, like 3 times as much as vitamin A, and at least 3 times as much copper. So they're concentrated. The word is concentrated, which means have less of it. But it is a superfood. You don't walk away from this trough, but have it intermittently every so often. Once a week is fine. So if people ask, what should I have weekly for liver? Assuming that you do have liver and would be willing to comply with that, I would say 9 ounces a week of beef liver, not so much calf's liver. If you're going to do calf's liver, then it would be 3 ounces a week, okay? All right, here is liver looking at some of the other things, is looking at the omega-6-3 saturated fats, because I'm going to show you in a second, like I've showed you before, this directly affects your uric acid levels. But what I'm looking at here is the ratio of omega-6 plus saturated fats to omega-3. And to see of these organ meats, right, we have beef liver, calf's liver, goose liver, kidney, beef kidney, tripe. Could have put in various kidneys. I just kept it simple to give, so you got the idea. Sweetbread is thymus right here. And so it's interesting, the beef sweetbread is worse than the calf's sweetbread. Eventually their thymus stops working, just like in all of us. After a certain age in the 60s in humans, your thymus sort of just disappears for the most part, stops working. Interesting that, eh? And brain. So what we're looking at is beef liver, and you could say calf's liver, but certainly foie gras. Goose liver is huge in terms of the omega-6 saturated fat and very little omega-3, and that is colossally bad. Though it tastes really good, by the way. I love foie gras. I know how it's made, so I don't have much of it. I haven't had any for about a decade, since I was hungry last. But that's what I wanted you to see. And after that, beef sweetbread, I bet nobody has this, but if you do, know that you need to be careful about that as well. So it's about purines, but this is about the saturated fats together with omega-6 because they bring in more uric acid through the kidneys. Fructose. Yes, we know it's gone up in time from the 70s and certainly continues to go up. It's part of processed food. It's part of the Coca-Cola, the Pepsi, and all the sodas, high fructose corn syrup, and then everything else you can think about. But we knew that before all this. So we knew that still. So this is putting it on you, by the way. This is not looking to blame somebody. This is now saying, this is on your shoulders to decrease that and stop doing this. If you really are a consumer of soda and so on and so forth, stop. Or don't care about your health. That's your choice. I'm not going to get between you and your choices. I'm just going to help you inform you as to some of the better choices. Okay, omega-6-3 ratio. This is just a recap. Our omega-6-3 ratio, polyunsaturated fatty acids, have changed in our diet so much that some cultures are becoming extinct because of it. What is this? This is your omega-6 over here. This is your omega-3. It's basically breaking it down, how it goes down, how we take it in, and what we eventually make prostaglandins. Not going there, but what I want to show you is we often hear about ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, is the omega-3 in plants. Well, guess what? It has to be converted to EPA and DHA, and it doesn't happen very well. And in some people, we know there are mutations, FADs 1 and 2, it doesn't happen at all. And those are mostly of African origin and related. So don't go, oh, you have to be black. Not necessarily. My wife is Sicilian, with all of North Africa and Sicilian, and think of the Mediterranean islands, have a strong African lineage as well. So it's related. Okay, omega-3s and omega-6s. Here's the deal, is that omega-3s, by increasing it, it will decrease your uric acid, your omega-3s. And your omega-6 will increase uric acid by reabsorbing it. Basically, it goes through the same thing you just saw, EPA, DHA, starts with ALA, which you know doesn't convert well, but we're going down through this particular pathway. These are the twos that you want to have preformed. Preformed meaning you're eating the animals that have that. And the plant-based ALA doesn't get to EPA, DHA very well at all. Oils we used in our food have changed. Here's the 50s. You've seen this before. I've covered this many times. So since the early 60s, you can see soybean and corn oil soon began after this, just skyrocketing. And so the idea was drop your saturated fats, increase your omega-6 fats. Oh, really? There's a linoleic acid in our bodies, which is the omega-6, from the 60s to 2010. Huge, up 200%, threefold. Think that has anything to do with it? So it's not about fructose, and it's not about purines, it's about the omega-6-3 ratio. And here's the global picture of that. Think of this, all the people here who used to be just Inuits, obviously now it's Canada and the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and the northwestern provinces, should have all been green, but they're not. They've changed dramatically like the United States with processed foods. We're keeping them from eating the foods they should be eating now that we've basically made their whole environment toxic. And this just says there's even, the worst is the green, the best is the green, having over 8% of omega-3 in your red blood cells. That's what we're measuring. And maroon is the worst. So here, all the Inuits up here have basically big problems because we've created them for them. Really, the only modern country that we see here is Norway. And yeah, you can say Greenland, thank goodness. And that's actually where the first studies were done in omega-3 back in the 40s and 50s. So, and even turn of the century, you can go back before that. So this is how it's changed. All of this should be green. It is not green. Look how it's changed down in the southern hemisphere as well. Oceania, as I'll mention right now, is that the biggest changes in Taiwan and Maori are the highest gout incidence, highest uric acid levels in the world. Why is that? Because they're the indigenous Taiwanese, not Taiwan in general, and the Maori Pacific Islanders. They are part of Oceania, or the Pacific Islanders, which is Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. And the very least is that they have not had generations and generations and generations of exposure to fructose, to sugar, to all of the oils that we've been giving them. So they had a very high omega-3 oils because they're eating fish. And that has changed. They still eat fish, but now they eat all this other garbage we've been exporting to them. I just want to end up on actual real people. I just picked out the last page of clients that I've seen, and I arranged it by the highest over here. I know it's small. The highest over here of omega-6 to 3, so it's almost 18. 18 or 17.8, 17.5, and all the way down here to 5.7. So that's the ratio, omega-6 to omega-3. And down below it is how low their omega-3 is. Obviously, that if they're low in omega-3, they're going to have a tilted, right? A very high omega-6. So I put both of those together, but it's led by the omega-6-3 ratio. What I want to show you is the top 4 are, look at all the other factors, all the other red factors that are way out of range. I mean, way out of range. Their glucose is, let's find glucose, 180, 200, 113, 117. They're almost more reasonable numbers. What about their insulin up here? 16, 52, 26, 20. These are outrageous. Should be 1 and 2. Arguably 5 at worst, but I stick with 1 or 2. That's healthy. So they are way out of range, and other things as well. This is the oil part. Homocysteine is very elevated. Inflammatory, highly insulin resistant, to say the obvious. And we can go on, but I want you to know that there's a lot of baggage that comes along with a 6-3 ratio and a lot of other ailments that you really need to address. Okay, it's another way of looking at it. Somebody inadvertently got the wrong test done, but it's another way of looking at these are your omega-3. They just break it down by each individual fatty acid. Here's your omega-3, there's your omega-6, and they total it over here. And so this ratio is an 18-to-1 ratio, which is right on the money from what we were just looking at. The point of all of this is that these are 5 factors that increase uric acid that you can address in your life right now, and you can change the worst that has happened to you and make it better, or avoid all the mistakes that people have had ahead of you, being obesity, diabetes, gout, dementia, Alzheimer's. Change it and change your life. So if this is the kind of video that you like, that we go deeper into a smaller area that has a lot of relevance to a particular population, let me know. Because my way is going, what are the labs about? What's the research about? Let's be real. It's just not hypothetical. It's not like, oh, I've read 10 different abstracts and therefore this is the conclusion. I take that idea and let's look at the labs. Do the labs tell the story that we have just learned about in these particular studies? If they do, that's a home run. If not, then it's too esoteric. But let me know if this is something you're interested in. Thanks.